The first thing I want to do is just tell you about Tritype. But the key thing I'm trying to get at is that if we look at anything with regards to the Enneagram of personality, Ichazo's work, Oscar Ichazo, it needs to be trialectic, patterns of three, your type and two wings, your type and your lines of connection, your three instincts, your three tritypes. So what and how did Tritype come into being? So in 2007, the Eurekans came to my training to see how I knew so much about Tritype. And then they realized that it was all from the research and that I had discovered a version of what Ichazo also discovered. So for those of you that didn't know about Tritype, it means you learned the Enneagram without trifix. And that's most people, because the first dissemination of the Enneagram was from Ichazo to his spiritual group, who all signed confidentiality agreements. So they weren't teaching it to people that weren't a part of Eureka, which was the name of the school. There were a few that were in that 1970 first training that then did use it, but didn't publish. And those that studied with Naranjo didn't even publish because they signed their confidentiality agreement, with one exception, and that was Naranjo's girlfriend did not sign an agreement. So she could use the material if she wanted, and that's how we're all sitting here today. The point was, if the Enneagram symbol that we use is the Enneagram of movement, the laws of 0 or 1, 3, and 7. And when combined, it maps movement in the universe. So it's creation and universe, meaning that for every action, there's a reaction and then a return to neutral. But the neutral is never exactly the same as the originating neutral. So it's change. And Ennea just means 9, and gram is graph or chart. So it simply is the one that was used and we identify with. But any map of 9 points would still be an Enneagram. Ichazo called them Enneagons. But to make a long story short, with the Tritype, as I noticed over and over and over again, as I was doing, by that time, thousands of interviews, before I even started to certify in 1995, I just couldn't quite understand why people identified with both lines of connection, positively and negatively, and why they had the core fears of each center, one type within the center. And at first I kind of ignored it. And then when it just became so obvious, I started tracking it. Now, if they identified with the 369, that made sense, right? Because there are lines of connection, or 147, or 258. But when it started to be types like today, 4, 7, and 8, we could say 8 and 7 could have a wing of each other, but 4 would be totally unrelated. And we also knew about the harmonics. I knew about the antipodes from Ichazo down to Naranjo, which were the 2 intense types, the 2 control focus types, and the 2 connection types. And so that would be the 4 and 8, the 1 and 5, and the 2 and 7. But of the primary types, it would be the 3, 6, and 9, and then you get all 9 types. So they're always interacting, but all 3 of the triads that we had discussed in the Enneagram world, I started learning the Enneagram before there were books. I had to rely on notes by people who studied with Kathy Spieth and some others that were pretty sparse. When I started seeing that pattern, I noticed that if they had a type that was already considered their lines of connection, they were the ones that in the beginning, when I was saying, how meaningful to you is it to know you have your tritype? And sure enough, it was people that already had those lines of connection. It wasn't like another contradictory element. But like David Daniels said, yeah, I'm a 6, and sure, I have my lines to 3 and 9, but I'm a 1 in the gut center, and I'm a 2 in the heart center. And he was very supportive of people that studied with him, and I'd known him for many years and was in a study group with him. And he could see that as a 6, and sometimes 6s want to stay with what has been taught. But what's really helpful to understand is that the Enneagram of personality is only 50 years old. So Oscar Ichazo's brilliant descriptions of the energies of what he called the 3 instinctual triads, and then the types within each triad, they're so descriptive. And then Naranjo came in and filled in all the psychological elements and other ways to determine type. But the initial issues and way of looking at it all came from Ichazo. So a lot has changed. So those who didn't get subtypes, one category, and then later, many people who were not taught subtypes saw the value of adding it after 1996 when we did our first conference as the IEA, I should say, because we wanted to understand how we could see things so differently. And then there was still this difference because people didn't know about trifix or my 3 types or tritype, what became tritype. So there are really 4 different dissemination. And if you consider what you are and how you learned information, it will help you see where you might want to go and get some details from the other viewpoints. But if you've studied with me, you're getting not only those 4 disseminations, but my research now with well over 100,000 people. I don't know how many exactly. I stopped counting at 40,000, but that was like 15 years ago. So exponentially, I don't even know what it is. So let's begin with introducing everybody, what type you thought you were, what tritype you thought you were at first, and then what tritype you identify with now.
My name is Sterling. I initially, excuse me, I initially thought that I was a 1 when I first found the Enneagram 20 years ago, and typed that way for a little while until it became pretty clear that I was a 4. So for me, finding out I was a 4 was important, but then the tritype really completed the picture, and kind of explained why I was different than a lot of other 4s with the 2 assertive types in there. It kind of changes the presentation of the type.
Exactly.
So that's been integral for me in understanding how those types influence the way I do 4, which has been really fascinating and important to me about tritype. Is when people get that part of it, it really adds a whole layer of dimension to the core type.
It sure does, because if you take your tritype stacking and your instinctual stacking, it equals what your perceptions will be and your behaviors will be. That's why we don't want to come from behavior to determine type or tritype. It's the other way around. We want to see your dominant type plus your dominant instinct will produce those ways of thinking, feeling, and behaving. Because a lot of times it can be confusing if you have a line of connection to another center, but you actually have the tritype of a different type. And I should emphasize too that tritype is more dominant than the lines of connection, because the lines of connection are paired with your Enneagram type. So it's just your Enneagram type moving very quickly between the lines of connection, but they don't go to one another. And that's key. Whereas with Tritype, you're utilizing the passion, the fixation, the convictions, everything about the type. So your worldview becomes very specific, because when your types come together, what do they amplify? And in the case of the 478, it amplifies wanting to be free, undeterred, to follow your muse, to create in some way. It's almost a must create. And it doesn't even matter what Myers-Briggs type you have, because it's a result of what's canceled out. But you're also, if you're a 478, thought of as a nonconformist. And actually 478s almost take pride in that they're an independent thinker. They act in accordance with what they feel is just, meaningful, and interesting. It just puts together so many factors that then creates a type unto itself. Now, some people think all they have to do is choose a type in each center, and that's their tritype. It doesn't work that way. To a degree, you can begin there for sure, but you have to look at the end result. And if you happen to be rigid, but think you have the 478 tritype, you do not. Because they're two different defense strategies and structures. So if you walk away today with just knowing that each tritype becomes a type unto itself, totally and completely. Okay, so let me go to Rob.
Hey, my name's Rob. Some of you might know me as Zeke. I started my journey with Enneagram probably about 5 years ago, and I just flippantly looked at like some descriptions that were online, and I was like, okay, I'm probably a 4, and then I moved on. I didn't come back to it for a while, and when I did come back to it, I read more into it, and I was like, okay, I'm a 7. I'm definitely not a 4. I'm a 7 for sure. It was just the sexual kind of made me think I was a 4. And then I saw one of Catherine's videos of the 147, I believe it was on YouTube. So I checked that out, and I was like, yeah, that sounds close to me. I think I can roll with that. I didn't really look much more into it. And then people in the community started to type me or tell me their opinions, and they're like, no, you're an 8. You're not a 1 or whatever, you're an 8. So I was like, all right, I'll check it out more. And I did, and I figured, okay, yeah, I'm probably the 478 instead. And then I kind of went back and forth between 7 and 8 for a really long time and couldn't figure out which one was in the lead, just because they both feel so integral to what I do. So I mostly identified as a 7, but a lot of people would try to convince me that I was an 8. So I was open to that, but after I talked to Catherine, it made it more clear that I was a 7 after all. So that was my journey to get to this position.
Just to see how the instinct, being the fourth factor, merging together, then creates even a greater level of specificity, especially since it's the instinct that triggers the types. And that was not known in the early understanding of the Enneagram, and certainly not what I learned in 1985 and onward. Instead, it was believed that you had one type, one instinct, and that it was kind of a secondary quality that gave you an opportunity to use the energy of the instinct to push through your passion, not your fixation, just your passion. And it clearly was not the case, because when I did the subtype research, it was person after person after person with these filling out the material, checking off what they related to, didn't relate to, what they'd add, what they'd cross off, and how they experience their instinct. Everyone could find, having contemplated it and thought about it, that their type was triggered by a disturbance, so to speak, in the instinctual arena. And that's what Ichazo believed, of course, but he didn't have subtypes. And Naranjo had subtypes, so he decided that they were important, but what he struggled with sometimes is people having an instinct so strong that you couldn't see someone's type. And that's what he felt about me, although I believe my self-presence really, really strong too. But I get where he was going. Is he couldn't type me. And he wanted to understand more about that. So he called it a mini passion. If you had one of your instincts so dominant that your type was not visible. And I come across people where that's true. But their tritype will be there. You just might have trouble kind of slowing it down and seeing what is triggering what and when. Okay, DJ.
My name is DJ, and when I first took the test, I got 7. And a lot of the reason for that is because I'm a pretty jokester person. Like, I like being the life of the party and being positive. But after taking it, I think when I was taking it, I was trying to avoid what I knew was my type, which was for personal reasons. But so then I got it back and got 8. And I just think I have a little bit more, I'm more realistic, I think. I think the 7 kind of comes out in certain ways, but at least the 7s that I'm around, they're a little perturbed by the amount of realism that I like try to present to them. So there's a little bit less of the lofty, like idealizing something, but more of like what's reality. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty much my, and then with Tritype, I thought I was an 853 for a long time because I think I'm a pretty I would say I'm an intellectual person, but and so I thought that was 5. I'm someone who's decently competitive, which I thought was 3. So a lot of my mistyping, at least with the Tritype, was attributed to going off of traits and not really motivation. And then Katherine helped me see kind of how the 874 works and the dynamic that it creates. And I'm like, oh, I'm doing all of those things. Like, that's very enlightening. And so the 4 was the hardest part for me to accept. I was like, no, I don't want that. Get off of me. I don't want that shit. So, but yeah, now I know that it colors my experience and it allows me to have a sense of taste to the way that I live my life. So yeah, that's what I have.
It adds a level of kind of individualism that's greater than just 8. Being more particular, being more defined in your self-image. Yeah, 7's optimistic, 8's realistic, and then the 4 is pessimistic. So we're really moving between those different dilemmas. But the 8 and 7 assert, and the 4 with 8 in the tritype is more overtly expressing what Naranjo called the 4's passion for protest. You have someone that is outspoken, direct, and to the point, but still has finesse, like the 7. Doesn't hit everything head on. There isn't a reason to do so. They're playful, teasing, They get around problems whenever possible, but if it doesn't work, then of course the tritype will assert. And you'll be able to see with this tritype how they are funny, how they kind of are flippant and playful and overly state something, but then laugh at what they just did and say, well, actually, that's just my opinion, but it's really probably 92% rather than 100%. Or there's just a kind of a synthesizing from 7, a certainty and competitiveness from 8, and then the need for depth and meaning from the 4. And then in this case, all 4 of us have the sexual instinct. So you're going to also listen to us comment on things based on that. So if you're the 4, 7, 8, you're intuitive, innovative, and protective. You want to be original, creative, and straightforward. A cutting edge tracker of both your internal, external worlds. It's a real hallmark of the 4, 7, 8, that they're monitoring and aware of both their external energy and their internal energy. Those worlds are operating simultaneously and then also overlapping. But if it was an 8, 7, 3, it's external. There isn't this need to also evaluate your internal world. If you're a 4, 7, 8, you are an unconventional, passionate, self-possessed master of solutions. And I would say creative. Outwardly, you appear confident, but inwardly, you are very emotionally sensitive. And so we say, wait a minute, but there's 7 and 8 in there. How can this tritype be sensitive, emotionally sensitive? Well, all 8s are sensitive. We just have a defense that pushes things out because we don't want to feel our sensitivities. And 4 is sensitive. And actually 7 is sensitive to things that are negative. So the sensitivity is clearly there. It just shows up in a very particular way. Sterling, tell everybody what you do. I'm very intrigued with the name you chose for your business. And because I believe that there are a lot of Enneagram teachers or enthusiasts that are a few particular tritypes. But if you're a 4, 7, 8, you go in search of systems and things that explain all types of variables, the curiosity of 7, the wanting to know what makes people think or tick of 8, and the 4 wanting to understand the meaning behind everything. So if you could say a little bit, Sterling, about what you do, what you've done, you can anywhere in your life, and, you know, for about 3 minutes, just give us a sense so I can comment on what's 4, 7, and 8.
Okay. Yeah. So the last bit that you mentioned about systems, for me, it's particularly being interested and always have been interested, I mean, since I was a child, in any kind of system that helped me to understand the world, but people more specifically. I've always wanted to know what made people tick. It kind of helps me navigate the world, and like you, I have an aptitude towards systems. So of course I gravitated to things that were my strengths. And for me, it's, you know, I have a few different kind of jobs that I juggle. On the one hand, I'm a professor, and but then on my sort of side gig is that I teach the Enneagram, you know, and we chose the name Empathy Architects because for me, the systems are only useful in as much as they help us to understand and create compassion with one another. And so I try to kind of integrate that whole philosophy into everything I do, whether it's teaching at the university or through the empathy architects. So, but I love systems, any kind of system. I found the Enneagram is very complete in a lot of ways, but I studied Myers-Briggs and all the things that you taught us as well, archetypes and anything. But even prior to getting into more of those kinds of systems, when I was in grad school, I really liked my diagnosis class. I studied to be a counselor, a therapist, and so I was really good at diagnosis, and partially because I see the patterns, and so pattern recognition is it is a strength of mine. It's also something that's made it can be problematic sometimes in my relationships, because if other people don't see the patterns, I can sort of push them to see the patterns. So that can be kind of interesting. And also as a way that I think has made me feel a little different, particularly from my family, because they're just not into any of it. And I'm constantly throwing out patterns and like making these connections. And, the latest thing I've kind of started folding in is, like ancestral trauma and things like that. And so I'm making all of these connections, and I get really frustrated when people don't see them, because it's like, you're connecting all these dots. And so my journey, for the past few years has just been able to kind of step back and realize that people don't necessarily see them as quickly. But, if I can remain patient, which is not a virtue I was born with, remain patient.
Type isn't patient.
Right. Yeah.
Or compassionate, but not patient.
Not at all. So
Types.
Go ahead.
It's like looking at the night sky, and whether or not you see just a blanket of stars or you see the Big Dipper, or looking up at clouds and seeing, oh, that cloud looks like a rabbit, or that cloud looks like a dragon or an alligator, whatever. I find that this tritype naturally recognizes patterns, some more than others, because they might have a gene that also enables them to do that. But every person that I've worked with that's this tritype needs to express themselves and take things that they've learned and synthesize them in a way that matches the patterns that they see. And the other thing is that there's an openness, even if they have another factor like a Myers-Briggs type that is not open. It's just a way of seeing the world. And messenger was the term that all three types in the tritype agreed with. The 4s wanted the mystic, the 8s wanted the catalyst or catalyzer. It just, okay, messenger, they could all agree with. The 7s like the messenger, but it was the one, like even like here, this is a 7 energy. And that's where the term was introduced by the 7s, and the 4 and the 8s would accept that term. That was no easy feat, by the way, coming up with names for the 27 archetypes that all three types would accept. My definitions I liked a lot, but I wanted people to recognize themselves. Thank you, Sterling. Okay, Zeke, what do you do? How do you use your tritype? And what have you noticed about your pattern recognition or the way you need to do things?
Well, I've been in the typology world for quite a few years now, and like Sterling and you have mentioned, it's been my entire life recognizing patterns, and particularly archetypes. And before I even knew what the word archetype was, I remember as a kid placing things in boxes, and each box had its separate meaning. And that was always extremely meaningful to me because it gave me a system to understand what was happening around me. And then I would take that system and apply it to other parts of my life and see patterns within patterns. And it was always, I don't know, fascinating to me. So besides that, being in typology, I started out kind of writing with MBTI, and I got pretty popular doing that, and I was a leader in the MBTI land. But then one time I came upon a system in Russia that it's kind of forgotten about, and I started looking into it and digging deeper. And the more that I looked at the system, the more I was seeing how it was playing out in my reality. It was like an extra level that I hadn't seen before. So of course I had to go towards it. You know, I had to figure out what it's about and what's the meaning. And the more that I saw these just like objective displays of this system play out, the more I was like, I got to translate this to English and research it more and figure out what it means and how I can see it among all these people. And not only that, but how do I get people to see it in themselves? Since I see it, I want them to see it too. So I translated it. I created my own system that I'm the creator and owner of. And I've been pretty much doing that for the past 5 years now. I'm gathering research and doing all sorts of things.
Share the name, Zeke.
So it's
look at it.
Yeah, it's Attitudinal Psyche, attitudinalpsyche.com. There's a Facebook group. I just put everything on Instagram today. I got a Twitter, so follow them, all those. But I think part of being a 7 lead and just having this tritype is that I'm always on the search for meaning. And that's really what makes me feel alive the most, is meaning. And if there is no meaning, then I would rather be dead. I mean, that's the 4 coming out like I really would.
That's why you could potentially think you were a 4, but then realize you're not, because you have to have the defense strategy fully as the lead type to be the 4. And a lot of people with 4 in the tritype think they are 4s, by the way. But then if you also have like 8 and 7 that want the unusual and the creative, it's hard to not see the 4 unless you don't want to be the 4. Like I didn't want to be a 4. Most 8s don't want 4 in their tritype, because then it's like saying, well, here's how I'm vulnerable. And we don't want to think about anything that's weak at all. So we don't. So we come to 4 later. DJ.
I would say I've always been a curious person. I think ever since I was young, I was doing that thing where I was seeing how things operated in the external world, not even so much figuring out what is happening inside of me. I think as I got older, I would see reality in a very juxtaposed way, like seeing how I'm doing something and then see how someone else does something and trying to synthesize the pattern and meaning from that duality, I guess. And so as I got older, I started getting into certain areas of study where I was trying to use a lot of the synthesizing like techniques that I've learned to see. And it was funny because everything that I've learned was to share to other people or to teach other people. And so as I graduated onto different subjects, when I got to personality theory, it was really in a way about teaching other people how to navigate the differences within human interaction and human behavior, and just sharing that. I'm always like on Facebook, usually making some video. I usually have some like moment of inspiration that I need to tell people. And I'm actually pretty, I'm pretty vocal about the things that I believe in. And if people don't, I'm not afraid to speak my mind. Like if I'm on Facebook, I can put very raw things on there, and which can cause some type of dissent or discord. And to me, it's more important to get it out than it is to protect what I have. I need to share it. And if it means people like me, that's great. If they don't, that's not my concern. It's like, I have something to impart to people. And if it means being rejected, then that's fine. So I guess I've always kind of done that my whole life. So.
And now you hear a little more of the 8 lead there, don't you? Because it's saying if people don't like it. Now, all 4, 7, 8s will still not conform to things that they don't feel called to conform to, that quite simply. And if a 4, 7, 8 has a boss or a parent that happens to be the 1, 3, 6, there's always tension, because the 6, 3, 1, 1, 3, 6, 3, 6, 1, they want ways to do things that are the same repetitively. And they teach their children and govern their employees with principles of very organized perspectives on how you do everything. So what happens to the 4, 7, 8 is when they are given their yearly review, they're invariably told that they're not cooperative enough. Now, the irony is that 4, 7, 8s are cooperating like a pretzel. I used to feel like, oh, I don't want to do that. That's stupid, but I do it. And I go, what do you mean I'm not cooperating? I did this, and this that I didn't want to do at all. I call that cooperation. But it doesn't seem that way to other people, because they don't realize the defense strategy of this tritype is to be in free flow and not have things halted or limited or needing to be a certain way. The best designs I ever came up with were the result of mistakes, where, let's say I was designing a piece of jewelry and there was miscommunication between the person that was doing the jewelry work, and they were just going to scrap it. And I'd say, wait a minute. If we put an amethyst there and you engraved there, it's like a whole new piece that's even more interesting than what I was intending. So it's that ability to just redo things. Now, there is this desire to be interesting and creative and autonomous. That's always omnipresent. But there's this additional way in which we can just see things that others don't see. So when I first saw the tritype, and I was calling it 3 types, people were very polite. They said, yeah, if you say so, Katherine. I know you've done a lot of research, but I just know the basic elements of the types. Now, you got to remember, this was at that point when I started really talking about it, was 26, 27 years ago. So they didn't even go to the different trainings that I did. You know, I went to Hurley and Donson and was certified. I certified with Helen and David. I certified with Don and Rusty. So I was exposed to a lot of different people, but they weren't exposed at that time to the other schools of thought. They were just going with one school of thought. And then when I had the week with Ichazo and the week with Naranjo, boy, that just, I understood what was dropped out, not understood, and what came from whom and why the teachers taught so differently. So in a way, if you're saying, but I'm a 4, 7, 8, and I don't do that, it could be as simple as the definition of 4, the definition of 7, and the definition of 8. I have a whole series. I don't know if it's available. I have to check on the types according to Ichazo and Naranjo, and what my research validated of their work. So pieces that have been dropped out are put in. And even I, in my teaching, wouldn't remember to say all the archetypes. I knew archetypes from a very young age, too. I read the little Dell books on everything you could learn, handwriting, faciology, from the time I was 7 years old. So that creative spark is always essential. We don't know who we are if we're not intellectually thinking about, but also needing to manifest. That concrete part of 8 wants to have something as an end result. It's not just going to be ideas. Like the 469 can have amazing ideas, but they don't have a tritype that's a can-do tritype. Or people can have a can-do tritype like 368, but they don't need meaning in the same way. Unless they have the sexual instinct needs meaning. So what I'd like to ask you is, what do you feel is your greatest strength and your greatest weakness? Can we start with you, Sterling?
Sure. Greatest strength, always a little harder for pulling up the string. I would say I'm very intuitive. I think that's a strength of mine. It also gets me into trouble, but it is a strength of mine. And also because of all the things we talked about before about pattern recognition and trying to understand people, I really do feel like I can very quickly understand where someone's coming from and sort of integrate that quickly so that I can kind of, I maybe have to work a little bit more in some regards than maybe some other people, but I easily forgive people because I understand them. And so I can quickly, now sometimes I've let things go that maybe I shouldn't let go, but I can easily kind of integrate and sort of have compassion for people. So that's a strength.
You there a moment, because you really have said something important, and that is that this tritype is forgiving. Even if we don't want to be and we're really angry about something, a way in which we feel violated or wronged, it's almost like, as with the 7 and the 8, you don't want to have to deal with that energy. So, and if you really are studying people and things at a level of systems and the different psychological variables and potential level of health, you are far more compassionate and forgiving. Thank you, Sterling, for saying that.
Yeah, no, I really relate to that. So I am forgiving because I can understand where people are coming from and how they got there. Doesn't mean it won't make me angry or upset or whatever, but I can forgive it. And if I don't understand it, then I will seek ways to understand it so that I can get to that point, because I don't want to hold on to stuff. I move on from things fairly quickly, apparently, compared to other 4s. I move on really quickly, and people are surprised by that, because I may have a really intense reaction in the moment, but then I'm done, and I can move on. If it happens repeatedly, that's a different story, and we have to deal with that then. But so yes, so that's a strength. I would say that my weakness is, aside from struggling with depression and things like that, but as far as kind of on the same lines that we're talking about, I think this goes along with the uncompromising bit, is that if I have an idea about what's happening and what's going on, and I'm really sure about it, you can change my mind, but I can be pretty aggressive about that. And you kind of have to, that can get me into trouble because I build the map and I can erase the map quickly, but I build the map and then I can be a little relentless about sort of pounding my truth into others sometimes. And so that I have to be mindful of that because I guess my energy can come off as too much sometimes. And I'm always a little surprised when people, I see people shirking away from me and then I'm like, oh, I'm being too much right now. And so then I have to like dial it back. And so that's because I am passionate and I
it's a passionate tritype.
Yeah.
So very high energy, passionate, wanting to be in free flow.
Yeah. So that can be a weakness of mine because even though I let go of stuff quickly, it comes up and comes out as well. So that's, and I don't do well when I hold stuff in, even though sometimes I should. It's not natural for me. I need to keep things moving and express. And if I can't do that, I get really frustrated. And that's when I start pushing a lot at that point. And that's when I can get myself into trouble.
Yeah, I mean, that's really good because the 478 doesn't have a type that's retentive in any way. There isn't a holding in quality. There's more of a quality of moving out and looking within, but not holding in. So that's quite common for this tritype to forgive, but they don't forget, actually. Zeke?
Yeah, I would say my greatest strength would be my ability to get to the bottom of things. And it's because I care deeply about that. And I also think I'm pretty decent at adapting to circumstances, no matter what they are. It's just because I can start to figure the puzzle out and I can start to see how the pieces are working together, no matter where you put me. So once I start to figure that out, then I can kind of dig my claws in, get into the like nitty gritty and understand like what the meaning is of everything around me and what people are thinking and why they're doing what they're doing. I think that's something that I love to figure out, and I just naturally figure it out.
Yeah, and it's very natural for this tritype. So where do you struggle?
So my struggle is I give away too much of myself sometimes. And what I mean by that is I can be a little oversensitive to criticism, especially if I feel like I've done the work to figure something out, and then I get the criticism, and it can cause me to react in ways that I don't want to, because I know I'm like giving my power away if I react in a certain way. But it's like I take things so seriously when I do them or figure them out. So once I get that criticism, I can be a little oversensitive. And sometimes I can feel a little too much when somebody has wronged me. And especially when they don't understand how they've wronged me, that's what really gets me going. Yeah. I don't mind if you have wronged me and you understand what you did and why you shouldn't have done that. I'm fine. I'll get over things like Sterling said in 5 seconds. But if that person doesn't get it or hasn't expressed to me that they get it, that's hard for me to get over. I just want somebody to recognize the ways in which they've acted.
Yeah, and that's so fascinating because you're talking about kind of a 7 characteristic and a 4 characteristic and an 8 characteristic all coming together. And I want to reiterate to everyone, it's not that we in our tritype or in our instinctual stacking that we're stopping and shifting. It's just always oscillating. And at times we'll hear the 8, the 7, or the 4 in this case. But the way I worded it originally years ago, it sounded like your ego does this, and if it does not succeed, and it's used all permutations of the type, the wings, the lines of connection, then it shifts to another type. So it's the way I wrote it. Even though in the next sentence I say they constantly oscillate, but it gave people the impression that they stop being their type and they become the other type in their tritype. Not so. You can see it. You can say, oh, yeah, that's my 4, but you're not becoming a 4. You are still the 874, the 784, or the 478. That's still operating at all times. If it's an emotional decision, you'll see the 4 if you have the 478, or 4 in the tritype, anybody. If it's a intellectual decision, you may have noticed already that Sterling, Zeke, and I talk about things like a 7 intellectually, that in terms of mental constructs. Now, the emotional constructs are those of a 4, but the can do, how we're going to get it done, and the bottom line is our 8. So in this case, DJ leads with 8. So can you talk about your strengths and weaknesses, DJ, and how you relate to
everything that was said? I would say I'm pretty passionate, pretty zealous, and pretty devoted. Like whatever I think has value, I will die for it. And I will go the lengths to proclaim it at whatever cost is necessary. If it means, again, like I'm getting attacked for it, or people don't like me for it, I don't really care about that. I think it's more like if I've set my eyes on it and I see that it has purpose, I'm like a train. I'm going to keep moving forward and do what I need to do and inspire people along the way and kind of motivate them and support them in their journey for meaning and purpose, while still going my own direction. So, but with that comes a lot of weaknesses, and I think I'm more aware of my weaknesses than I am my strengths. Like I'm more, I know that I'm very impatient. I know that I'm very impulsive, and intolerant of frustration, and like if something is not working the way that I want it to, I get mad quickly, and then once I solve it, I'm done. It's not really personal, and it's not really legitimate anger, but I'm very impatient. So I'm also like that if I'm like debating someone or in some type of discussion that gets heated, because I forcefully press my opinion, but I'm also willing to hear theirs. So it's a weird thing where it's like, if you can meet my energy when we're in this kind of contentious conversation or whatever, I will quickly incorporate your point of view into my own. I don't really get really personal with it. It's like, if I can get the energy out of it and they can refute a point that I made, or they give me some insightful objection, I will quickly abandon what I thought and incorporate this if it's a better position or more consistent. So yeah, I'm just very passionate and very impatient. Yeah. So
I mean, it's very true. And what you might notice with all 4 of us is that we are identified with the areas that we consider our weaknesses. And they're the weaknesses of 4, 7, and 8. The overreactivity of 4 and 8, the need to have things unusual. Sterling, can you begin talking about what you feel people wouldn't know about you that can be revealed by the 4, 7, 8 tritype?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, what people are often surprised to find is that I'm actually pretty, I'm not as confident as I may seem. I'm confident for a 4, probably, but I'm not, and I'm pretty open about sharing my, relatively open about sharing my insecurities and things that bother me, just because I really value kind of like the radical honesty thing. But there are certain things I'm very I suppose I don't like to show my vulnerabilities about certain things. I can talk about them intellectually, which can be surprising to people because I'll talk about anything. But then people are like, I would never know that by looking at you because I'm talking about it flippantly. So people are often surprised that underneath that, there is a sensitivity. I'm not displaying it. So I think that can be surprising to people. And then how, I guess one of the things is that I'm very, well, I guess that's along the same lines. That just the sensitivity that's underneath the flippancy and the kind of ability to just talk about anything. I don't really shy away from any kind of topics, and so it can surprise people whenever I do share something that is vulnerable or sensitive or something along those lines, because they don't see it immediately, and so. I think
we don't look as sensitive as we are.
Right.
I mean, with micro expressions, we do, but you have to know a really master level of micro expressions to be able to see it. But once we learn to see it, we can recognize it in someone.
Yeah.
And it'll be through the eyes.
Right. And there's also this juxtaposition for me, maybe with for leading, where sometimes I'll kind of broadcast my insecurities to get discussion going around it, and then people are like, wait, what? Because then I don't like it when people are like, oh, I'm really sorry to hear that, like I don't want people's pity, so then I'm flippant and I make jokes about it or whatever, and then it's confusing to people. And I realize I'm sending kind of mixed messages, because it's like, here, let's talk about our vulnerabilities and our weaknesses and things that are sensitive to us. But then, like, when we really talk about it, I'm not talking about it in a vulnerable, sensitive way. So
you're talking about it in a mental way. It's no longer in the emotion. With this Tritype, if we're saying something that's vulnerable to us or that we're sensitive about, we're already okay with it.
Right.
Or we would not be talking about it. But because we thought about so many things, and it's such a deep level and broad level, because we have the 7 going wide and the 4 going deep, and the 8 just willing to call it off, we've thought through so many circumstances. So the minute, especially with the 8 lead, that I say that I'm good about something, or that I can talk about my tender sensibilities, I've already made it okay. And if I'm being in the moment, like really connected to my emotions, I become verklempt. It's like, I can't talk. And I don't want to be without the ability to just say things. I don't want to have things stop for me. And that's what emotions do, is they stop us. And
I was going to add to that when we do talk about something that really is sensitive, for me, it would be with, my people that are close to me. And just because I'm not talking about it in a sensitive way, because in order to get it out, it has to come out in the kind of flippant way. But then if people don't recognize it, that's hurtful, because it's like, okay, I'm actually sharing the sensitive thing and it's still in a sensitive place, but then because I didn't say it in a sensitive way, people miss it. And then they're like, oh, they laugh about it or make a joke because they're used to me doing that. And then I'm like, oh, that's the downside to that kind of.
Yeah, we've taught them.
Yeah.
And yeah, I remember when I was first in the Enneagram world attending trainings, and we were supposed to be working on the thing we needed to incorporate. And so for me, it was my vulnerability. And we were in this breakout group, and I was being really vulnerable. And they just kind of went, okay. And then they were talking about something else. I go, time out. Wait a minute. I was just really vulnerable. and it was a 4 and a 6. And they said, oh, well, I think that way all the time. That's like normal. It's not normal for me. So all of us can benefit from understanding that that's basically what the types are doing. They're basing things on their how they process things, what triggers them, what their history is. But even with different histories, there are predictable ways in which the Tritype gives greater specificity than Enneagram type alone, and for sure with the instinct. But the reason I even came up with the term stacking for both of them is that there is a hierarchy for the Tritype and for the instincts. And I only put 2 instincts simply because the third is implied. And that was just laziness on my part of not wanting to say, especially on the early message boards. I didn't want to say wing, W-I-N-G, so I would just say 8W7, which is fine if you're seeing it written, but if someone says they're an 8 wing 7, yeah, they don't say W, they say 8 wing 7, then it could more likely sound like they are 7 with an 8 wing. So it's really better to say 7 with an 8 wing because half the people will understand you. But those are the people that learned about the Enneagram online. They weren't in an actual intensive and heard the way the types were talked about. But I did that. I had all kinds of shortcuts. Sexual, social, suppressed. I got so tired of writing all 3, so I just put the first 2. And it never occurred to me that people would then think that I believed the first 2 were important, and then they created an instinct unto themselves. So this is both the strength and the weakness of this Tritype, is that I think of these creative things, I test them out. I've done 23 research studies. I'm doing another one, a repeat of one that I did years ago on how you see the other types. That flippant part of us is also kind of lazy. We have so much energy for what we want to do. We will go above and beyond for people. We will work nonstop. But there's another part of us that wants shortcuts. And it's not like the 3 shortcuts. It's to simplify things. So even though we see things in great complexity, we also want to narrow it down to the 8's view, simple, direct and to the point. And I want to stay with you a little longer, Sterling. Talk about your humor. Do you see the sardonic humor?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, my humor is very sardonic. And there's some sarcasm thrown in there, but I have to remember that not everybody gets it. So I'll sometimes say things deadpan or make a joke about something that's like really serious. And then people are like, oh, I don't do well with like people that I call it, pearl clutching, right? Where people are like, oh my God, you don't say that, right? Because I don't do that. So I have to remember, that's the one way I figured out that one is, I'm appropriate in social situations as I need to be, but I don't like that, being boxed in like this kind of humor. You say this or you don't say that. Like, but yeah, very sardonic. And it can lean on the dark side. I can have kind of like dark humor. And again, that some people can find off-putting. But I think I managed to do it in a way that is still, with the 7 in there, I can still do it in a light way. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yes.
Thank you. Because we're all sexual types is our lead, we tend to deliver that to an intimate who knows that we're just kidding and that we don't want to be so full of ourselves that if, like, let's say we wrote a poem and it's very meaningful and deep, and at least for the 8 lead, I'm going to go, what? And I kind of go cross a bunch of stuff out and put a happy ending. But if I were the 4, I'd probably stay with the more confessional, sensitive elements. But I always have to counterbalance it because this Tritypes always like, don't get too thinking too much of yourself. But we can have a kind of confidence that some people can see as grandiose, but we'll laugh at our grandiosity. We'll do something flippant or big, but we know we're doing it. Now, obviously, there can be people that have personality disorders, but that's another thing altogether. Just in terms of the display, this sardonic humor is usually kept for intimates, but some 8s will say it and people don't get it, and then they think that person's terrible. So usually they learn to modify, especially with the sexual instinct, because the sexual instinct is looking for that perfect attunement, one at a time. But if you have to be in a group, you want to have developed a kind of rapport with each person so that the group feels like the sexual instinct. It never will be. I did have that happen one time in my life where there were 3 couples together. So there were 6 of us. And we had the entire discussion at a restaurant for about 4 hours. And they were just cleaning up. They didn't mind that we stayed. And one person would talk, everyone listened. Then another person would talk about the subject, everyone. I never had experienced that before. Because generally the social factions come in and one person starts talking to another. But what the sexual wants is everybody talking about the same subject, going deeper so that it's more exciting. Not deeper to be grounded like a self-pres, deeper to raise the energy and the interest and excitement. But now, Zeke, you lead with 7. Do you see the sardonic humor, or does it stay in the domain of sarcastic?
Oh, yes. Very, very sarcastic. It's sardonic too, but sarcastic as well, both. I do try to understand my surroundings. I do have a social instinct second. So I try to monitor who my audience is at times, at least enough so that I don't run into anything uncomfortable, which is the 7. But yeah, I love it when I can be around somebody, usually an intimate, who I can just say whatever comes to my mind, and they know that I'm not serious. As controversial as I sound, it's not. It's a joke most of the time. So, I mean, there is a little bit of seriousness in most of the things I say, but yeah, I appreciate the sardonic humor and enjoy it, especially when somebody else is doing it and you get what they're saying and you see a bunch of other people react in a negative way, and it's just entertaining because you know that they were joking.
Oh, exactly. It's like, it can be really misunderstood. Like, one of the first years I was on Facebook, I was just thinking that most people were friends of mine, but I was forgetting there are other people that only knew me from my work, but had never met me. But I said something like, on the anniversary of my son's death, I said, well, Brandon's not going to be 30 today. Just because that's the way the 8 thinks. It's like, he would have been, it feels too sensitive, but just make a joke out of it. Well, he's not going to be 30. My friends would all know. But one person said to another person, oh, how can she be so insensitive? And it's like, oh, no, it's because I feel so sensitive. It's just the opposite. But we have to think in terms of who our audience is, even if we don't have social second, because the tendency is to be flippant and mercurial. The energy is shifting between these three in such a different way, polar way. We share the creative part. We share the desire for the unusual and the authentic experience, but the rest, we're different types that are decision making, for example, can become a problem for the 4, 7, 8, because one, usually it's 8 and 7 ganging up against the 4, saying, no, move on, get over it. But if it was 4 and 6, it would be just the opposite. Then it would be, if there's 8 or 7, it's the third type. They don't get it. That part of the persona does not get the same level of play in a way, because it's the majority rules. So the more things the types have in common and they share, the more amplified they are. And what's canceled out because the other 2 types don't have it is minimized. It doesn't mean it's not there, but it's greatly diminished. I want to make sure Rob answers that too. What's one thing that you'd want us to know that we wouldn't know?
Well, I feel like I'm just repeating, but obviously that I am quite sensitive. That's the main one. I think people don't recognize that. And also that I'm feeling anxiety the majority of the time. Really the majority. And people don't see that. They see me as leader or somebody that they can count on, and they think that it's just so easy for me to be that way. And it's not. I'm usually acting out of anxiety in the 7 way, not really, in the 6 way. But
you lead with the head center. That makes total sense.
Right. And a lot of the things I'm doing are because I'm trying to figure out what is causing me to feel anxious, or running away from it, essentially. And chasing, I've got my eye on something else, so I can chase after that. But the anxiety still doesn't go away. It still carries with me. I'm not confident. I'm not this fun. I mean, I am fun loving, but it's not like I'm trying to be that way. A lot of times the anxiety does drive me, and I've recognized it later in life. Earlier in life, I didn't realize it. I didn't even know that I was anxious at all. I didn't have a word for it or an understanding for what was going on. But now that I do, it's easier for me to explain to people that, no, I'm not really that confident. I'm quite sensitive, and things bother me very easily, even though I don't let it out. And when I do let it out, like the others have said, I can turn it into a joke. And I can use it as a way to relate to people too. It's easy to be funny and get that connection one-on-one with somebody when I can turn it into a little bit of a joke, especially if they get it. And then they want to, now if they don't get it, it can be hurtful, especially if I am saying something that is serious, but I'm not trying to be serious about it. Yeah.
No, that makes total sense, especially for a 7. All head types, of course, run by anxiety. That's how things get going. Whereas gut types, it's anger gets us going. And for heart types, it's shame that gets them going. But none of us like anxiety or anger or shame. They're all terribly painful. It's just, in what order do we feel this tritype? So we'll come back to that when we look at the instinct. But DJ, can you answer that? Like what people don't know about you because of your tritype?
Yeah, I would say is that I'm pretty sensitive and I'm naturally naive. Ever since I was a little kid, like I would be the kid that if they said there's something on the ceiling, I'd look up. I'm like, ah. So I was very, and I'm still pretty much like that, pretty naive. But I think the 8 tries to create a perception that I'm not fazed by foolery, I guess. But I am also very sensitive. I'm pretty heartfelt, but it's not overt. Like I don't publicize it, and it's when I do publicize it, it's very private, and it's with really 1 to 2 people. And it comes out in really strange ways. Like if I'm feeling like grateful for a person in my life, I'll text them out of nowhere and say, hey, I really appreciate you. And they'll think something's wrong with me. They're like, what's happening? Are you okay? And I'm like, no, I'm fine. I'm just in that kind of 4 space where I'm looking back on my life and seeing how every person was an integral part of my journey and wanting to let them know about that. So yeah, I would say I'm naturally a pretty sensitive and big-hearted person, but I don't try to show that and give that to everybody. So.
And an 853 is not going to do that. It takes a tritype that has 4 or 2, but even more specifically, the 4 with the sexual instinct dramatically changes it. And then what about you and sardonic humor?
Yeah, my humor is, it's sardonic and it's dark, but people usually know, like, and I'll antagonize it more. Like, actually I was with friends last night, and I can capture the environment where I'm playing on jokes and jokes and jokes, but usually they are pretty sharp and pretty, I wouldn't say they're really sarcastic necessarily. They're strategic. Like I set it up and build it up. But I will say dark things. Like someone said something about my mom. My mom passed away, and which is not funny, but this is funny in context. So she passed away, and they said something about moms, and I was like, yeah, I wouldn't know that. My mom's dead. And I'm laughing.
That's like my comment.
Yeah. I'm getting weak, and they're just like, what, are you okay? Like, something's wrong with you. I'm like, no, it's funny. Like, chill out. So when they don't see it as funny, I'm like, I'm not obviously serious. Like, why would I laugh at that? So it's kind of that thing where people that know me, they'll say, oh, that's just how he is. That's just DJ. Like he doesn't mean anything by it. He wants to amp up the environment and make it more lively and more fun. So I definitely, especially if things are like opinionated, I will hold up something that's an opinion, and I'll just say something and impart it in the group that's like kind of not a shit starter, but in a way, but I'm clearly joking because I feel like people should be able to discuss things in a way that's like they don't get so like, oh, worked up about it. And so I'll just throw it out in the ether, and then they just get, and I'm just kind of like sitting back like, oh, this is incredible. So yeah, I'm a pretty chaotic creature, I'd say. So yeah.
Well, it's so mercurial, actually, this tritype. And the 8 would be the most sardonic, than the 4 with the 7 and 8, or the 7 with the 4 and 8, because we lead with that kind of, I'm going to mess with you because I want to have fun. Let's have fun. It's kind of like saying, let's play. But other people, they can take the 8 too seriously. But if the 8 has the 7 and 4, what happens is the 8 feels the emotion while maybe someone was talking about your mother, it was coming in, and at the same time, your 8 and 7 have to circumvent it to make a joke. Just like when I was typing, in honor of Brandon's life, because I also can do a tribute with pictures. I can do anything.
Right.
But it's when the emotion's coming in, and before I even know it, I've just changed the ending or made fun of it because it's more manageable.
Right.
And 8 and 7 are there, and 8, 7, and 4 all want to be real. 7's just talk about real through sarcasm. 8s talk about real through sardonic humor, and 4s, they're sardonic with a lot of irony. 4s kind of lead with the irony in terms of their humor. So thank you. Now I want to look at the way the 4-7-8 has the 3 triggers. And we've touched on it, but we look at it in terms of the type, and you just want to see the 3 come together. So the 4 has the trigger of feeling inadequate. So if there's something in the conversation or going on that kind of mirrors to the 4 that they're inadequate, there's a reaction. And with the 8, if the 8 is underestimated or manipulated, the 8 reacts. And the 7, it's being criticized. So if there's a scenario where the 4-7-8 feels criticized, underestimated, and made out to be inadequate, boy, you're going to hear from us, because that's our kryptonite. And it's helpful, though, to look at each Enneagram type. I did research at the same time I did the instincts research and the how people see themselves research, any style. I also did one on the core fears, because I knew there wasn't just one core fear. Like some 7s may have a greater fear of missing out, while another 7 may have a fear of being incomplete. They need more. They'll be deprived. It might be deprivation. Another 7 might be triggered more by feeling trapped or limited. So I kind of went out into the community and just asked people what their core fears were. And of course, the wonderful thing about the internet is in my mailbox, whole bunch of data on how people saw them. And then I clustered them. So I always think it's a good idea to look at the core fears. And I think I have it as a free Enneagram map at katherinefauvre.com. I use it a lot in everything, because I just feel like people need to know what these fears are by type. But if you say, okay, I'm the 8 that has an unconscious fear of being underestimated. So if someone kind of thinks I don't know how to do something, they don't ask me, they tell me something, then I was quick to then assert and let them know who they were dealing with. And we do all this when we're younger because it's all biological imperatives, just acting out. And then criticism, like, wait, the example I gave about conforming beyond anything that felt natural and then being criticized for it was really hard. I'd have to say, well, I understand your feedback, but based on this, this, and this, and that other people aren't doing this, this, and that I would like, I'd say I cooperate. So that it's still coming from the 8, but it's picking up the 7's fear of criticism. And then if after all that effort, you're seen as inadequate in some way, then even the 8 will not like it and then over-assert. So the 3 coming together. So I like to look at what triggers, but like, for example, just a list of the core fears for this tritype are being inadequate, emotionally cut off, mundane, ordinary, commonplace, being abandoned, emotional pain. I'm moving into 7 now. Emotional pain, sadness, disappointment, boredom, limitation, incomplete, or missing out. And then moving into the 8, it's weakness, being mediocre, being controlled, disempowered, humiliated, weak, vulnerable, pathetic, and at the mercy of injustice, and manipulated. I didn't say that. So it helps. And I do have them all in this book, which is the 27 Tritypes Revealed, which you can get on my product page at katherinefauvre.com. But really seeing the ones that trigger you the most. Like I used to think for me it was being manipulated or feeling manipulated, but I came to find that in a way, for someone to negate my prowess or my sense of knowing things, the way in which I'm self-possessed, so ask me, don't tell me, will trigger me more, even more than manipulation. But another 8 might choose the word manipulation. I want to get to the life purpose, people to talk about that. Now, I know we've gone through it, but kind of what I discovered with this tritype is the life purpose, the mission, that part of themselves that needed to just be expressed regardless, always has to do with finding the universal truths. So we might think of truth as an 8 thing, and it is, but when you have 4, 7, and 8 together, you have the person that's trying to find what is innately human, what explains a greater number of things, which like it looks like it's going out, and it is, to a bunch of different variables, but then it comes together and there's an answer at the end. And it goes out again, new answer. So there's that ability to go deep, but people with this tritype feel they must continue doing that. And then they feel this desire to want to talk to people about what they've learned, to have other people benefit. And that's why that universal term of messenger came about, because you do want the enjoyment and the stimulation of discussing whatever you've learned with others. So you kind of have to teach others first for them to be able to have that discussion. But the other thing is that you know who you are by it. So you're not happy unless you are working with universal truths and communicating whatever you've learned and manifesting your vision. Like in a way, you've all manifested because you have your Instagram, you have your YouTube, you have your ways of being in the world and teaching what you know or getting people in discussion about it. And I went on to have them agree in a way with that a true messenger is a catalyst for change. And then the 8s were happy, because change is our carrot. What we're kind of addicted to is the change. That's why creation, it's changing it again and again and again. Now we might have favorites that remain the same forever, but overall our teachings change. Like when I had been teaching for quite a number of years before I spent a week with Naranjo, and then I realized, oh, my teachers didn't understand important pieces. So I sent out an email and a letter, actually, because it was even earlier, to all the people that had studied with me. And just free of charge, I told them all the things that I had learned that were different than I had originally shared with them, like how to really type a 6 and how to see the sexual 4. It was not in existence in the early teachings, because those early authors did not have the benefit of studying with Ichazo and Naranjo. I wanted them all to have it right. So we're not attached to things needing to stay still. Instead, we feel comfortable revising and revising and revising. So I want to kind of ask each one of you how you see that. Sterling, how do you see the comfort with modifying your materials and what you say and how you say it?
Yeah. Well, I always liked I remember when you I heard that the catalyst for change was one of the sort of archetypes that was in the running. I always liked that one because I do feel like that's my job here, is to create change. And so for me, that means that I'm always learning things. I'm never closed to new information. So I'm always integrating new information. I get very frustrated when people won't integrate new information. That's when I will get kind of defiant and I guess arrogant with people, because I'm like, why would you not want to know more if it's out there? Like, what? So I get frustrated when people are like fixed in what they know or what they think they know, because I know that throughout my life, as I've folded in new things, my understanding grew. So I am always open to changing things, and hope that my ability or desire to take in new information and integrate it and synthesize it and then put it back out, hope it will create some sort of change for someone else. I think going back to where you were kind of originally leading with it was that I can be really triggered when people are resistant to the change. And so part of my journey has been being able to recognize when people can take things in and when they can't, because I have a tendency to push it even when they're not ready. And I have to know, when to push and it'll get in, and when to push and it won't. And so, but that's kind of a personal journey for me, but also can be painful if I'm trying to create that change and trying to integrate and synthesize to move something to a new understanding, or just even energetically shift something, and someone is like, nope, don't want you to do that. I want to stay in this, whatever the box is, because that's where they need to be. So I think as a 4, I would prefer to be sought out for that, just because my energy isn't extroverted at first, and I'm an introvert. So I feel most comfortable when people come to me for that. But if I do open up and start sharing and people don't want to hear it, or they shut it down or whatever, that's really hard for me. But yeah, it's such a natural part of my life to take in new information, fold it in, synthesize it, and then put it back out. It happens with everything all the time. So, but yeah, and so it shows up in my work, and even as with my teaching job, I'm constantly changing my course calendar and my readings, and then even on the day of teaching something, I'm like, yeah, we're not going to talk about that because this other thing seemed more important that needed to come in. Or if a student brings something up in the class, if I'm teaching something, like, I'll follow that energy if it's relevant and interesting to me. And I don't mind shifting things around and resynthesizing it.
The defense strategy is not attached to consistency. It's attached to innovation. And so we have the easiest time of all 27 tritypes of changing, because we're always innovating anyhow. And we'd rather, again, we want to discuss these things with people. So we want to help them understand what they don't know. But even though we can have an opinion by just assessing things we already have in our life experience, we also will go very deep in something we're interested in, because we want to know it inside and out. That's why periodically you'll see that I've changed celebrities or people in history where I hypothesize they might be a certain tritype. And then new information came out on the person. Like Michael Jackson fit incredibly as the social 4, but there was something about him that he didn't display that felt 2-ish, but I went with the social 4. I even traced it into prints. But then there were a couple videos released that weren't great videos, but they had Michael being Michael, and it's just clearly a 2. And there's so many archetypes of 2 that were dropped out of the dissemination of the Enneagram. And that's why I decided to do the 2s, the 6s, and a lot of 8 was dropped out. I mean, people think 8s aren't sensitive. Oh yeah, we are. Why do you think we overreact? We're sensitive to our stuff being moved or other people trying to control us in some way. So thank you, Sterling. How do you experience that, Zeke? Your life purpose and these universal truths and innovation. Is that your leading?
Yeah. Yeah, by far. I like to call it the theory of everything. You know, it's the universal theory in science, but I'm essentially trying to do that in typology and kind of reverse engineering humans through behaviors and the way that they think and all of that, and trying to follow it back to where it comes from so that we don't have to do the crazy extra quantum work that it would take to figure out the human brain, which I'm sure will happen eventually. But I'm kind of doing it from the other more spiritual, I guess, angle. But for me, it's like the journey of learning all this stuff is what's amazing, and having to switch things around that you thought were correct before and now they're incorrect. The reason you did that is because you found more. You found something that was deeper, that was more meaningful. And that's, to me, that's the hit of adrenaline, the aha moment where you found what you were looking for, or you found something that you didn't even realize was there. And all of a sudden it's shining. It's just like, you want to take that thing and never let go of it because it just gives you such a rush. And even more if you can get somebody else to see it, which is even better, because that's really that's my goal is I want to find these things, and then I want to get you and everybody else to see what I saw, because it was true. It was universally true, like you said. And some people don't want to see it, and that, or they can't see it. And that makes me even work harder to make sure that they do see it, because I think it's important. And I mean, if it takes me arguing it out with them respectfully, I try to be respectful. Sometimes I'm not, but I'll put it into terms where they understand, or I'll build it up to where build up the idea to where it's something new that they haven't seen before, so that they can recognize. I don't know if I'm explaining that correctly, but even though I hate like being criticized or limited or deprived, none of that stuff really deters me from still going through this process and trying to get them to see it.
That's a great way of saying it. This Tritype is never deterred by people not getting what they see. Like when I first had people fill out the questionnaire and send in words, pictures, or phrases that they related to according to their type, it was astounding to me that people from different parts of the world that were 3s sent in the same cigarette ad that was talking about merit and yes, 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 and this, victory position or this position, yes. And I do understand, I'm sure the company made sure that cigarette was in every magazine. So whether they lived in Australia or Germany or Canada or France, wherever they came from to go to the trainings here, actually, most of them were here, they would be exposed to that if they bought a magazine. But still, it was only the 3s that sent that in. But then I was hooked. That did it. I was hooked there on out. The instincts were intriguing to me, and they overlapped for a period, the 2 studies. But I never stopped, actually, with either study. I've carried on all since 1994, 95. But yeah, thank you that you just said something so significant. We remain undeterred, even if no one gets it. Like I didn't stop with 3 types. When no one understood it, I still kept seeing people had 3 types. What were the 3 types? Which one was the lead? And when these pictures came in, and people said, oh, there's no visual Enneagram. I said, well, apparently, 500 people now in this study think there is, because they've taken the time to send me pictures. And what was interesting about the words or phrases is they were a picture themselves, many of them, or they just sent it to me with their questionnaire. And I could have gone like, oh, gee, no one sees this that I see, and just dropped it. No, I just looked for more ways to help people understand. So that was the other thing the messenger identifies with, is being the translator and helping people see the different ways of looking at things. I mean, that's why I have 8 tests within one, and I'm already having my version 8 ready for version 9 by having all the words the types use programmed in. So yes, for the nuances, you need to have a session with me, but I want people to notice these patterns. I didn't need to spend a bunch of money on programming the patterns that alert people they're 6s, or that they have something that is like a 6 wing, or that potentially something inconsistent in the way they're testing, to let them know. But if you get something, you have 6 as your head type, then you most likely do. It's not going to show up. But I wanted people to benefit from that and not go 20 years thinking they're another type. So that's how we're tenacious. Thank you, Zeke. That's really very, very true. Undeterred. And you don't lead with 8. Sterling doesn't lead with 8, and he's undeterred as well when there's something that interests him. DJ?
I would say, so I'm speaking on the life mission, right?
Yeah. So universal truths, communicating your findings, manifesting your vision, catalyst for change, happiest when you're creative. Your creativity helps you find and express compassion and sensitivity to others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say it's a 2-way channel, in that one channel is me going in a direction where I am self-actualizing, in the sense that I'm learning more about life and about these essential truths, and incorporating them into my worldview and adapting and realigning with it. But then on the other end, it's also kind of teaching and motivating other people to see what is inherently valuable and worth pursuing with that level of zeal on their own. And so I can be very supportive, and kind of like, I'm trying to think of an archetypal, kind of a pastoral aspect where
guidance, giving guidance.
Yeah.
We bear witness to people.
Absolutely. And to be able to be I don't know, like not controlled by the outside, in the sense that I'm very grounded in what I believe, but I also want to uplift other people to find their own sense of direction and value in their own lives. So it's almost even more valuable for me when I see other people benefit from that principle, and seeing them integrate that in their lives and see their life becoming more of having more value. And you get those stories back and you're like, man, this is what life is about. So I see my 8 kind of going to the 2 in that way of like being kind of a shepherd in a way, and like leading people and proclaiming what I think to be essential for life. So yeah, that's what I would say my life mission has been since I was able to I don't know, articulate things. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. It's a very young age that we begin doing that too.
Mm-hmm.
So much so that like friends that knew me from the time I was 7, a new school had opened and we were all at this elementary school. No matter what I was interested in, they knew I was going to master it and then teach them. And because there was no way we could have a discussion where we didn't talk about the new thing, but it was always analyzing something, like whether it was color or archetypes or expressions, micro expressions, the Enneagram, physiology, psychology, anything, any system was going to be discussed if you're around me.
Yeah.
But we have a way to make things enjoyable to people too.
Right.
So the motive is that we want to talk about it with people, not just think it. But because we're so diverse, creative, and innovative, people are intrigued. And if you add the sexual instinct, we want to be intriguing. We want devotion, and we are devoted to the select few that are our twins. And there are never more than a handful, and usually it's more like 3 max. We may have many acquaintances where we can have moments of closeness, but it's a totally different story to reveal everything. And there's concentric circles. And where the sexual, in that first circle, they're not just people that we feel safe with. It's a type of safety where we can express everything. And we want the person to listen willingly and enjoy listening. And we want to enjoy them and know as much about them. If it's not equal, it's not as intimate at all. You have to reveal about you, I reveal about me, and it's like equal. It's not one person, like in terms of attachment theory. If someone has an insecure attachment, they may want to really glom onto someone and it makes them feel more secure, and they might think that's sexual. It isn't. It's an easy misunderstanding of the sexual instinct. So I'd like to go into that with the 3 of you as well. Sterling, how do you see the sexual instinct manifesting with your tritype? I kind of hear it in what you 3 have said already, but what do you notice?
I guess for me, I relate to the kind of concentric circle thing that you talked about. And there's very few people for me that are in that inner circle. And those people can kind of get away with anything on the one hand. But there is a very high demand for me, and mostly it's energetic, for intimacy. Like I hate it when I'm around my people, and we're not talking about anything, right? When there has to be a charge. And so, and if it isn't there, that's when I get agitated, because I need that. But on the same token, if I'm really close with someone, whatever we're talking about, it doesn't have to be the topics I'm interested in, but usually the people I'm close to are interested in the same things I am. But we can talk about anything and it has that charge. So it's more the quality of the interaction that I'm looking at. I'm very, very hypersensitive to when one of my intimates is not, is in some way disconnected. That's the quickest way to get the bad behavior to come out, because I'm like, what's the problem? And then I want to figure it out. And even if it doesn't have to do with me, that's fine. I need to know. And so for me, there's a disclosure part of it. I always say to, my person, my, best friend, that, if I know, I can deal with it, but what I don't know, I can't deal with. Right. So, and that's with everything. And so I do see that kind of as my 8 coming in. I kind of need full disclosure, with things, and, I can deal with anything if I know what it is, but I don't like,
just like Zeke said,
yeah,
if you know how it hurt him and betrayed him, the sexual instinct has a fear of betrayal. And we also have 8 in the tritype, which has a fear of betrayal. So if we feel betrayed and the other person gets it and can actually verbalize it,
yeah,
the way in which they get it,
yeah,
then that's when we let it go. But yeah, you keep going.
yeah, no. So that element's always there for me. I guess it's just, it's hard to put it into words because it is such an energetic thing for me. But if, my favorite thing to do is to talk about, and share things with my intimates, and we can go deeper and deeper into something and skip from topic to topic, and it goes wherever it goes. But it's what creates that charge for me. And I need that in my life, and I only have it with a few people, but I also, there's the expectation that I should have it everywhere. So then when I don't get it in certain places, that's when I start pushing, for people to go deeper with something, or to look at something from a different perspective. And, if I can't at least momentarily make that connection with whoever I'm with, then I get bored. And then my attention goes somewhere else. And I think people, I do see how, particularly as I started doing more, Enneagram work and going to intensives and trainings and things, that people can misconstrue that, and it can hurt people's feelings, because my attention shifted, because I'm like, oh, no juice here, and I have to go find it somewhere else, and people can feel rejected. And I don't want to be rejecting. I'm like, I'm going to go find my juice, and you go find, whatever it is that you're looking for, and no hard feelings. It's just, there's no connection here right now. Maybe at another time there, it will happen. But so that's how I see that showing up. But there is a need for disclosure, and for people to like own whatever it is, whatever is in the space. If you can own it, I'm good. But it's when people won't claim their stuff, because I quickly can claim mine, and I can pinpoint it, and I'll call it out, and I'll tell you even if it's not nice, I'll be like, yeah, that was pretty shitty, but I did that. And I can own it. And I know everyone can't do that, but people that are close to me know that about me. And conflict for me will arise when someone won't take something, because I'll take what's mine. And if you call something out and I didn't see it, then I'll be like, yeah, sure, that's what it was. And to me, that's intimacy. But if I have to pretend, and there isn't that just 100%, it's a tall order, 100% complete, like everything all in thing in my relationships, then I just, it's hard for me to maintain it. So.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good explanation of it, because the sexual is the most charismatic type, but their focus is on individuals. So we could be with 6 people, like I mentioned, where everyone listened. Like, it was incredible to do this, a very large group of people. That was a church that had studied the Enneagram for 10 years, and they wanted to add the instincts. And we could put the self-pres in one room where they couldn't see the social and the sexual. So and then I could go from room to room and see what they were doing. And then I had them on panels talking about their experience. And you could see the way the self-pres could be anti-self-pres, and the way the socials could also be anti. They didn't like the rah-rah socials or vice versa. And the sexuals were the last to get started because they were having a one-on-one. And I don't just mean being with one. In fact, one-on-one is not a good word. I started using that because of business. And because even intimate isn't okay to use in some businesses. And I was in organizations like the Federal Reserve Banks. And yeah, they have rules about rules. You can't say spiritual, for example. So I would say spirited or interested in pursuits that are of an inspirational nature. I had to kind of relanguage things to get the Enneagram in there. But the point I'm making is that this sexual can have like two friends if all three friends are close, but it's usually the sexual two friends and they're also sexual. Otherwise, it doesn't really work. And when that group, finally, it was the largest group, the sexuals, because they're interested in this work even more. But they created one big, large circle, and one person spoke, and the rest of the room was dead quiet, listening to that one person. And it was an extraordinary thing to see. I wish we'd had cameras then. I could have recorded the way each instinct ran their energy with one another. And people can feel excluded when there are two sexual types together, or the sexual type is getting the charge that they want, the hit, the energy that is more exciting, because that's what we're overly attached to. But it has to be with a loving component. So even if we're not in a love relationship with the person, we want to feel their kindness. We want to feel their caring, because the sexual wants to merge kind of the sexual energy with love. So it's more mental than people realize. It isn't about the physical gestures or behaviors. It's about the way we feel when we are attuned with someone and they are attuned with us. It has to always be equal to be pleasurable. So thank you, Sterling.
Can I add one thing to
Sure.
that? The three types coming together with the longing of the 4, and then there's the sort of gluttony of the 7, and then there's the lust of the 8. There's a lot of intensity, and then the sexual subtype coming together. There's a lot of intensity happening that I think our Tritype does a really good job of making us, there's that sort of nonchalant, flippant kind of thing that can come across. But if you ignite it or engage it, I've had people like be really kind of like step back from it because it can be a lot. And if I am focused on someone, then just like everything else we're interested in, there can be that kind of obsessive energy that comes in because you want it all the time and all of the person, right? So
especially as a sexual 4.
Yes. So for me,
really amplified, because I loved the way Naranjo described the sexual 4 as in a way cannibalistic, that whatever they love, they want to devour it.
Yes.
And that's how the energy runs with all sexuals, but with a sexual 4, it's kind of square.
Yeah.
It's a great example. But all of us, the 4 of us, will describe it similarly. And you can tell that even though I'm a woman and you're men, we're saying the same things. It doesn't sound like it's coming out of a particular gender or aspect of our sexuality. It's us. It's a part of the way we maneuver in the world. It doesn't have a race, creed, color, dogma to it. It's like what ignites the passion, passionate feelings, intense desire to know something. Thank you, Sterling. Rob?
Yeah, I would say that when it comes to the sexual instinct, it's more of I'll reveal layers depending on where I believe you are. And I'm also monitoring what you're doing back so that I can make the assessment of do I want to continue this or do I not? And if I don't, I'll still try to keep the connection, like the social connection, but I've still already pushed that person out of the circle if they're not.
They're closer, yeah.
Yeah, if they're not giving me what I'm interested in back. And then if I have none of that in my life at the moment, then I have to go to like the non-people things like games or sports or something where I'm being competitive, and that can bring out at least a similar feeling, but nothing compares to getting that passion and that feeling from another person. I prefer it to be people. And I can, what'll happen is why I have to go to like things and competition and sports and, the other stuff, intellectual pursuits. It's because I'll start to feel deprived, or I'll feel like my need for the SX, it controls me, and I don't want that. So I'll have to lean back on my other passions in life, because really it's my life force. And if I don't have it, then it's like I said before, what am I doing here? So I'll just put things in place until I can go back to getting that hit off of people.
And that's why having a mate isn't enough. You have to have some key people that you can be totally yourself with. And even if they're more of an acquaintance, if every time you see them, you just immediately in sync, that's pleasurable. And maybe if you live near each other, it would be more. It would become a closer and closer relationship. But that's what we're looking for. And one of the most common mistypings are people want to be 4s and they want to be 8s. If they're sad or emotional, they want to be 4s. And if they're angry, they want to be 8s. It gives a reason for being angry. But the most common instinctual mistyping is the sexual, because people think, oh, I like sex, so I'm sexual. It doesn't work that way at all. In fact, you're too particular. Everything's has to have even the most casual experience has to have meaning. So if you have meaning with someone, you can not need depth in the moment because it's already been created. But I can tell if someone's sexual because I will build the bridge and they can be in their sexual instincts. We all have all 3 instincts. But if I stop building the bridge and they don't maintain the bridge, or there's an interruption and they don't say, oh, go back to what you were saying, they're not sexual, because you want to understand the inner pinnings, the underworks of the people that you're attached to. And it's, again, not like attachment theory. It's because they're looking at 2 very different ways, but still the word attached matches. But it's about desirability. And we want to be desirable when we're sexual, and we want to choose people that are desirable to us. And there's nothing personal against those that we don't act as close to. We can care about them very much, but we will seek out or choose to spend more time with people that match us, especially with our tritype. So that's really what what I want to look at, DJ. So as the 874, how does your sexual play out?
There's so many different ways. I think primarily it's finding going after what I feel like is interesting and what is in a way novel, but what captures my attention. I feel like I'm kind of like a moth to a flame thing, and if there's someone who's interesting, it doesn't matter if it's a guy or a girl, it doesn't matter if it's something that I believe in or if I don't believe in. It is simply just interacting and interfacing with that energy in some way and getting like building from it. It's almost like I'm leeching off of that energy and taking it. And it almost helps me to recreate my worldview about things. And with that is some of the sevens, like acquiring people as these experiences, these novel pieces of information. So in groups, I'm usually the person that's trying to create that foundation of energetic relating to where I'll want to talk about things that are either, it doesn't have to be contentious or debatable, but something that has substance to it. So I don't know. I just want to have that type of deep intellectual conversation that requires everyone to contribute. I don't want to be the only person contributing to it. Like I want everybody to have their own opinion and their own foundation that they can incorporate in the group, because that's what aids in it kind of hiring the intensity of it and kind of the meaning of that interaction. So yeah, and I think all of that makes me very spontaneous and adventurous because I'm always looking for that kind of novel thing that I can interact with and learn from and acquire more meaning in my life. So yeah, that's another thing too. I can be pretty standoff, or at least appear to be standoffish if people are talking about things that are more social, like things that are more of like, hey, how's this going, or how you doing with it? Just like those things seem somewhat trivial to me. So if I'm in that kind of conversation, I'm like, okay, we can talk about the weather for 5 minutes, like, or we can talk about, I'm like, who cares about that shit? Like, let's talk about stuff that is intense and exciting and interesting, because the weather you can turn on and find on TV. So to me, that's pointless. So I could come off as somewhat kind of like standoffish, but a lot of times it's because I'm listening intently to what someone's saying, and I'm thinking about it and processing it. And yeah, so yeah.
That's a perfect way of describing it, because there is, like Sterling was talking about, wanting to, in a way, obsessively take that experience, that person, they want more of it.
Right.
It's like we all do, but if you have the 478 tritype, you really want more of what is stimulating and helps you see things new, and every moment could be created in a new way and new perspective, reshuffle everything. And if you have closeness, true closeness with someone else, then you're going to discuss things about yourself that you wouldn't ordinarily.
Right.
Whatever we've learned in the world, we're going to go back and share it with the intimate person, whether it's the best friend, the mate, a sibling, a child, a parent. It could be anybody, a teacher. Mm-hmm. But that person we met in our life that we can share it with, it can mirror facets of ourselves. They know us well enough, and we know they're safe enough because they know us well enough. It becomes more real, and we want it to be real. And the sexual instinct, the greatest innovations don't feel real until we've expressed it to someone, till we've talked about it and made it more concrete and added to it and redesigned it. So yes, thank you. And, in terms of the blind spot, of course, it's that we can be so focused on our opinions and what we've learned and our ideas about things that we can get hooked on needing profound experiences and profound insights. And other people just don't need that at the level that we do. So when we realize that being the sexual and the 478, that everything's either profound or profane, and that we see the subtleties of both and in all their variables. But I would also say that we can be limited by believing that we know something based on our deep research and our study of human nature and people, and that we don't cooperate. I mean, there are times when we try, for sure, but overall, there are times when we just are not cooperative, and it feels really uncomfortable for people to want us to conform. It can feel we can be so resistant. And then the growing edge, of course, then is to recognize that resisting limitations is not true freedom. We're not free because too much energy is going into the resistance or resisting people that want us to conform and narrow our view or perspective. And that when we're in resistance, we have stopped that natural flow of creativity. Think about it. The minute we're in a push energy, pushing against something, it's not just moving where it needs to go. And we can miss the moments when we're pushing for creativity rather than allowing for creativity. We can feel that need for stimulation and kind of push circumstances and people to say and do things, or will say things or start something up because it's so enjoyable to us. And that really true liberation and freedom comes from being in alignment with our higher self and not just what's going on around us. And that we can get a little too far out in our creativity. And as I said earlier, we can come off route sometimes if we've linked up with a person at a party and then we just talk to that person the whole night. And we do it more than the other sexual types. It's what happens when the instinct combines with the type. Like I know self-pres 478s that they want a lot of what we want, but not at the level of intensity that we do. So what I'd like for each of you to say is, what have you found helps you, or that a way in which people can help you with those moments when you're stuck in needing it to be profound and trying to get things in a more, like both the instinct, deep and dimensional and innovative space. I'll start with you, Sterling, again.
I would say that for me, it's if someone can, I think one of my strengths, just as a 4, I guess, is being able to like recognize people's like individual gifts, like see what it is that they're bringing to the table. And I try to mirror that to other people because that's what I want people to do for me. And I think if people, even if they're not super interested or they, if you can allow me to express something about something I've learned or something that I know or whatever without the resistance, I can kind of back off of that need to create the energy. I see that dynamic. I talked earlier about my family and how they're not into stuff, and I find that with my resistance shows up when they can't, when they're not open, at least to allowing me to let some of it out. Because sometimes I realize people want to shut it down because they're afraid of it may go places.
They're afraid of where you can go.
Right.
Where the 478 can go.
Right.
And that's why it can feel selfish to them, because we can, especially with sexual, get that energy to go a particular way by seducing people into the ideas or concepts that intrigue us.
Right.
Yeah, yes. They don't want to always go where they.
Yes, exactly. That's happened not about a week ago, and I just brought up casually. I was talking about past lives and reincarnation and all these sort of philosophical things and metaphysical things that my family just isn't, they don't talk about. And I was like, just casually at dinner, opened up this huge philosophical conversation, and everybody was just like froze. And when they froze, that's when I push, and then I'm like, and what about you? And then there's like this, and then I get into that sort of antagonistic energy. And then I call out that they're uncomfortable, and I'm like, seems like you're pretty uncomfortable with this. Why do you think that is? And then it's like a thing. So if people can allow, just not,
That's a perfect example of the way the 4 does it. Yeah.
So if you're just a little open, I knew they were uncomfortable. I'm not blind to when people get uncomfortable, but when people completely shut down and when I can tell people want me to shut up, that's when I push more. So if you can just allow a little bit, I'll back off. I can tell when people are uncomfortable, and I'll be like, sure. And then we can shift to something else. But if I feel like,
be honest, wouldn't you say being honest?
Yeah.
Like, I'm uncomfortable with this.
Yeah.
I don't think in those terms, and I really don't enjoy talking about it.
Yeah.
I would say our Tritype goes, oh, okay, and goes on to another subject.
Yeah. I can respect the honesty, and move on.
Because we do have 8 in the Tritype, and the sexual doesn't want to be. If it's not going to go deep, we're going to get bored anyhow. Mm-hmm. And the 4 are the same thing. But we'll try and stir it up and get things going that direction, for sure. Yeah. How about you, Rob? I call you Rob. I think of you, Zeke, but I'm trying to also call you Rob.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
How do you see it running for you?
So your question, it was, how can people help me with moments where...
What helps you, your own idea, be more in balance and not have such a kind of hunger for profound experiences and interconnections?
Right. Well, a lot of it's been just doing the research on how you can actually make a difference, which is what I try to do. And a lot of that, for me personally, it's being more conscientious, because I have a really hard time with conscientiousness. In the big 5, it's like my lowest. It's probably like 1%.
I would say to a large degree, our Tritype does.
Right. I don't like to follow the rules. I don't like anybody to have authority over me. I really struggle with having a boss. My boss has to be cool with me and understands like how I work, or it's not going to be a good time. So I prefer it to be like that. So really understanding that you have to be conscientious. You've got to be consistent. You've got to sometimes do the boring drudge work that it requires to get to the next level. Understanding that and then seeing it play out over my life after I've incorporated into my routine. That helps me a lot. Be okay with the fact that not everything's going to be a passion love fest 24/7 like I would like it to be. And also to understand why something matters. And that, sometimes the boring, conscientious rule stuff does matter. And it is part of the journey. So if I can keep that in mind and remember that the payout is going to come, I don't have to chase it right now. I don't have to get that thing immediately like I want to. Instead, I can rely on the plan, I can trust my own plan that's going to happen, then that happens a lot. That helps out a lot, and understanding why it matters. And especially if somebody else can, if I'm having a moment where everything's just blasé and boring and I'm not getting anything out of it, if somebody wants to stoke that in me or spark me to go back to my normal self, if they can ask me, well, why does it matter? What matters to you? Let's get down to the core of it. If they can do that for me, that's beautiful. That's great, because then that takes me to that space where I feel my most creative, where I can get back into that flow, which is so addictive.
Yeah. And it's rewarding, and it can be very good for other people because we see nuances and understand them at levels they've never been understood before. So there's a lot of great stuff. We can be selfish or we can be selfless. It's interesting dynamic because 4, 7, and 8 are all doing what they want to do. So you put the 3 together and it's magnified. But if we are in flow and we are just seeing people as they are, we have more and more and more compassion. So all 3 types get to a version of compassion naturally. So you put the 3 together, the 8 will become magnanimous. The 4 is known for their compassion and their support of people that are suffering. And the 7 wants to inspire and help people cheer up their woundedness and their pain and their suffering. So it's just like a magnificent thing when we're coming from the high side. But when we're coming from, I need to fill this up, when we're feeling deprived, we do seem like self-directed, and we want people to be on the same channel we're on. And then the sexual really wants that too, so even more so. How about you, DJ?
I've noticed that when people give me perspective, that it really grounds me, because I'm massively impatient and impulsive, and whatever is interesting to me in the moment is going to be pursued. And I think people that are in my life will give me perspective as to why that thing is even worth pursuing, or how I'm pursuing it. Because everything that I do is obviously with a lot of intensity. And so, yeah, my sister is a 6, and she really, when I'm in that place, she kind of puts me in other people's positions to where I can see, like, oh, okay, I see what you're saying from that. Like, when someone can just be direct and give perspective, then I can see kind of the impact of how my impulsive and impatient nature is creating kind of, I don't know, like disharmony or lack of
discomfort. It creates discomfort in people. If you're not following standardized ways of doing things and thinking and acting and feeling, it brings up people's kind of uncertainty. So they're uncomfortable with us. Now, if they know us, they enjoy it. They just get in the, RV and go for the ride.
right.
But if we're a little irritable or conflictual and we're being overly provocative because of that,
Mm-hmm.
if someone kindly says, why does it matter? Or the way your sister helps you understand the other person's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
If someone does that in a really nice way, we're open. But if they do it in a scolding way, we are uber resistant,
Mm-hmm.
because we do not want any authority over us whatsoever.
Right.
So you have the bond of closeness and trust with your sister. Mm-hmm. So you're going to trust that she's coming from a good place of wanting to share it with you. But do you feel that's true of people in general?
No. I'm very, very resistant to being controlled. I mean, to the point where I'll tell myself, why can't I just go along? Like, why do I make everything such a big deal? And I'm still not really sure. I mean, I haven't really figured it out. I mean, what I've tried to do, so for example, at work, when we get done, they tell us to call and see if people need help. Now, in my mind, I can think about 30 reasons as to why I shouldn't call, because this guy came in late. This guy doesn't get there early. So he doesn't really need help. He's just either lazy or he's not coming in when he should. So I'm like, I come in early. I get my stuff done. So I should be able to go home early. So what I've been trying to do over the past year is, when I'm done, I will, on my own terms, ask if people need help. And I feel in control. And I'm like, okay, like, I'm willingly offering up my freedom to help other people. But if someone else from the outside says, go help this person, I'm like, no, I'm not helping him. Like, it's an automatic response. And then if I can just go through it with them, I might be able to they might be able to talk me through it. But if they command it and just say, go help this person, I'm like, no, I'm not helping them. So I'm very...
That's the 8 version of it.
Yeah, I can be super uncooperative. So yeah, I'm still learning that, so.
Well, here's the thing. Because of the tritype, we want to have the personal, and the instinct, we want a personal reason. Now, the minute someone shares a piece of information that we couldn't know, like they had a loss in their family, or, I mean, we're the first tritype to want to then change what we said no to and help.
Right.
Whereas the 268 is always helping. Mm-hmm. We help when we think it's truly needed. But if we think someone's taking advantage and we're having to work harder because someone else isn't working hard enough, no, we're very hypersensitive to that, and we can definitely come off as uncooperative. I was always asked to go and help someone write their orders or train, when I had a boss. But I always had a boss that was 3,000 miles away. Mm-hmm. I didn't want one nearby. I could govern my schedule pretty much the way I wanted. But because I was able to do things and plan it out how I wanted it and get it done so I could have my free time, then they'd want me to go do it for other people. And I would say, well, no. Yeah. I mean, I spent all that time doing it. But then if I happen, and then I'd call that person. I said, what is your struggle with the orders? And if they gave me a reason that was meaningful, I'd change on a dime. Mm. And actually, it's hard for us to hold a no with our tritype. We can have a very strong no, but just the way the 9s will say yes, but yes means maybe, and maybe means absolutely not. Mm-hmm. With the 8s in our tritype, no doesn't mean no. It means no until we decide otherwise. And it might be in seconds, or it's when we get a new piece of information that we reshuffle again and say, oh, okay, under those circumstances, yeah, I'll do it. Mm-hmm. And you and I will do it like an 8, and Sterling will do it like a 4, and Rob will do it like a 7, but we all have that quality. Mm. Correct? Mm. Okay, I just want to ask you guys if there's anything you think I didn't say about our tritype before we close that you want to add.
I would say that with when 4 is leading, I've noticed, just even as we're going through this, that when 7 and 8 are leading, you have the double 7 possibility. And so for me, sometimes even with other people of our tritype, I'm a little less likely to kind of do the 7 thing and move through something quickly because I don't have double 7. So I'm like, wait a minute, that was a little too fast for me. We didn't really process that. And so I think when 4 is leading, that can be confusing. But so I just wanted to throw that in there. That
that's good.
Yeah, that there's that aspect. But I guess I would just say that I always, for the most part, I always mean well, even if I'm kind of presenting something in a provocative way or something. There's a point to it. I'm not just being provocative just to be provocative, right? There's always somewhere that I feel like I'm leading, and it, in my mind, it has benefit. Even if it's something that needs to be healed or brought up, I'm not just trying to poke people to poke them. And so my interest or provocation, and I know, as the dreaded sexual four, there's sometimes that energy comes up and people are put off by it. But I really do, for me, I really deeply care about like everyone's growth. I know it sounds weird, but like everyone
the fours are humanitarians. So what you're saying is totally accurate. And our tritype is actually also humanitarian. So it's amplified with the four.
Yeah.
If you lead with four.
Yeah. So that's what I would want people to know, is I really do mean well. There's always a focus on healing something in some way, but I just know that you have to find it, see it for what it is before it can be sort of processed. So that's what I would say, at least from my perspective. So.
That's great. Zeke, did you have anything that you feel was not said or would be different coming from the 7?
I think the tritype gives a bit of a darker feeling to my 7. I don't relate at all to any of the like live, laugh, love 7s, or the, the ones that are constantly chasing the new and ideal. I'm actually very dark, and sometimes I like to be dark. I like to just sit in sadness and contemplate, and it's not so, I mean, this is really the only time I could ever admit that, because I feel in company. But yeah, I think my 7 is, and I also think there's a tendency for the tritype, when the 7's in the lead, to be triggered mostly by feeling inferior rather than.
It is inferiority, yes.
Yeah, like I don't want to ever feel inferior. And when I do feel inferior, I have the ability to go into that place and kind of sit in it and feel what it's like, which I think like a 793 or something isn't going to be able to do that. Yeah. So I think that's what throws people off. That's why they always think I'm an 8 whenever they first meet me, or they, because they don't recognize that it's just a different flavor of 7. It looks a little more sad.
And that's the sexual instinct. So remember that my research revealed that the instinct is more dominant than type. So when we look at our tritype, we have to look at identifying with the sexual 7, the sexual 4, and the sexual 8. You can't say, okay, self-pres 8 with social 7 and sexual 4. It all has to be the same instinct first. Now, at a later level in coaching, I do work with figuring out which one. It's actually pretty easy. You just look at the stacking of one and the stacking of the other, and it plays out. But when you're working with the dynamics of the type, the instinct's running it, whatever your instinct is. So you have sexual 4 in you, I have sexual 4 in me. You have I have the sexual 7. But the sexual subtype does like to immerse themselves in sadness, and because what comes out of sadness? Meaning, emotion, connecting to it. So with our tritype, it is darker. There's no question, or a willingness to go there, and we enjoy it. It's a way to process our feelings too, listening to sad songs. But there'll be songs of our choosing, not just the standardized sad songs. They're not appealing because we're very specific. Again, we're very individualistic. This is the most individualistic tritype. Thank you. DJ, is there something you feel that I didn't say about 478 from the standpoint of 8 in particular?
I mean, I guess we talked about it a little bit. Is just how the 8 in this tritype is more readily empathetic, maybe, and just yeah. So yeah, that's all I have though. That's all I can think of.
Thank you so much. And I promise to do more of the type panels, another tritype, and I do promise to do instructions on the test again, since I've added so much and how to interpret it for those of you that really enjoy that. You just go to katherinefauvre.com. Thank you.